What if the person who would one day command a ship to freedom began life unable to command even his own name? Robert Smalls was born in 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina, into a world that told him exactly what he was worth. And it wasn't much. His mother, Lydia Polite, worked in the house of Henry McKee, a wealthy slaveholder. Robert's earliest memories weren't of play or school. They were of watching other people make decisions about his life. But Lydia wasn't the kind of woman to let her son grow up blind to the truth. She made sure Robert saw what slavery really meant: the fear, the humiliation, the chains that stretched far beyond iron. Therefore, by the time he was a teenager, Robert wasn't just dreaming of freedom. He was planning it. When he turned 12, McKee sent him to Charleston, where enslaved men were often hired out to work for wages they'd never touch. Robert did everything from lamplighter to rigger to dockhand, but the sea called to him, louder than the chains that bound him. On those docks, he began learning tides, currents, and ship signals, knowledge reserved for white pilots. But while others saw a boy doing chores, Robert was studying escape routes. Every wave that crashed against the harbor walls whispered the same promise: freedom was possible, if you were bold enough to take it. By his early 20s, Smalls had become one of the most skilled sailors in Charleston. Therefore, he was assigned to a Confederate transport ship called the Planter, a decision that would one day make his captors regret ever underestimating him. He had the skill, the access, and the plan forming quietly in the back of his mind. But no one could have guessed just how far that plan would take him. By 1861, the Civil War had erupted, and Charleston Harbor had become its beating heart. Smoke curled from cannon mouths at Fort Sumter, and the city buzzed with Confederate pride. For the enslaved men working the docks, it wasn't just war. It was a cage tightening. Robert Smalls had spent years perfecting his craft, learning every twist of the harbor and every salute of a ship's horn. Therefore, when the Confederate Army needed skilled black sailors, he was placed aboard the CSS Planter, a 147-foot transport steamer used to ferry weapons, ammunition, and supplies for the rebellion. By day, Smalls appeared to be a loyal crewman, quiet, obedient, invisible. But beneath that calm was a mind constantly calculating. Every trip through Charleston Harbor was a rehearsal. Every Confederate salute he mimicked was practice for the night that would decide his fate. The white officers on the Planter never saw him as a threat. They bragged loudly on deck, left blueprints unattended, and often went ashore at night, leaving the enslaved crew behind. But their arrogance became Small's advantage. He watched, he memorized, he waited, and each night he returned to his tiny quarters, thinking of his wife Hannah and their children, still enslaved nearby. Freedom wasn't a dream anymore. It was a plan with coordinates, signals, and timing. Therefore, when the opportunity finally arrived, when the officers once again stepped off the ship, Robert Smalls didn't hesitate. He was ready to risk everything for one impossible voyage. It was still dark when the chance finally came. The night of May 12, 1862, the white officers of the Planter went ashore for the evening, confident their enslaved crew would stay put. But Robert Smalls wasn't waiting for orders anymore. He was about to rewrite history. He gathered the small crew of trusted men. Each one knew this was a one-way gamble. If they were caught, the punishment wouldn't just be death. It would be an example, a warning to every enslaved person who dared to dream of freedom. Therefore, they moved like ghosts, every footstep silent on the wooden deck. Before dawn, Smalls slipped on the captain's coat and hat. From a distance, under the dim harbor lamps, he looked just like the Confederate officer who usually stood at the helm. The disguise was bold, maybe even insane, but it worked. The Planter's engines rumbled to life. Slowly, they glided past the first checkpoint, then another. At each fort, Smalls gave the exact whistle codes and hand signals the real captain used. The Confederate guards waved them through without suspicion. But as the ship neared Fort Sumter, the last and most dangerous gate, tension thickened. One wrong gesture, one wrong tone, and it would all be over. Smalls lifted his hand, saluted the fort, and blew the coded signal. Seconds passed like hours. Then, the fort signaled back. Permission granted. Therefore, he steered the planter full speed toward the open sea, toward the Union blockade, toward freedom. When Union soldiers spotted the ship, they prepared to fire, until Smalls raised a white bedsheet his wife had sewn for this moment. "Good morning, sir," he called out. "I've brought you some of the old United States guns." That single line broke centuries of silence. Robert Smalls had done the unthinkable. He stole a Confederate ship and delivered it to freedom. But this victory wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning of the fight to prove that freedom didn't mean equality. The morning after his escape, Robert Smalls woke not as property, but as a man who had just humiliated the Confederate South. The planter wasn't just a ship, it was a trophy. Inside it were Confederate codes, weapons, and maps. Smalls had delivered not just freedom, but intelligence that would aid the Union cause. Therefore, the Union Navy quickly realized his value. Smalls was hailed as a hero in the North. Newspapers called him the man who outsailed slavery. He met with President Abraham Lincoln, helped persuade military leaders to allow African Americans to serve in the Union Army, and personally piloted several vessels for the Union Navy, including the planter itself, now under the U.S. flag. But freedom came with its own battles. Smalls wanted his wife Hannah and their children to experience the life he'd stolen back from history. So when the war ended, he did something few could imagine. He bought his former master's house in Beaufort, South Carolina, the very home where he had once been enslaved. Therefore, when Reconstruction began, Smalls didn't fade into comfort. He stepped into politics, driven by the belief that the fight for freedom didn't end with one daring escape. It began with it. He was elected to the South Carolina legislature and later to the U.S. House of Representatives, where he fought for education, civil rights, and equal treatment under the law. But as the tides of progress rose, a darker current began to pull back, one that would test how much America truly valued the freedom it had promised. Freedom had been earned, but equality was still out of reach. Robert Smalls had sailed through cannon fire, yet what awaited him in peace was a quieter kind of war, one fought not with bullets, but with laws, mobs, and lies. During Reconstruction, Smalls worked tirelessly to rebuild the South on new ground, pushing for a public education, fair wages, and voting rights for the newly freed. Therefore, he became a target. White supremacists viewed him as the embodiment of everything they feared, a black man with power, dignity, and the respect of the people. Violence swept across South Carolina. Armed groups like the Red Shirts terrorized black voters, burned homes, and tried to erase the progress men like Smalls had fought for. But Smalls refused to back down. When his own election victories were challenged, he stood his ground in Congress, speaking with the same calm defiance that once guided a ship past Confederate guns. Therefore, even when he lost his seat to voter suppression and intimidation, he didn't retreat into silence. He continued to serve in local government, ran businesses, and mentored younger leaders. Still, the sting of hypocrisy was clear. The same nation that celebrated him as a war hero now looked away as he was denied the rights he'd helped secure. But that's what made Robert Smalls remarkable. His courage wasn't measured by one act of rebellion, but by a lifetime of resistance. Steady, relentless, unbreakable. Robert Smalls didn't just steal a ship, he seized his destiny. He transformed an act of defiance into a lifetime of service, and in doing so, forced a nation to confront its own contradictions. After decades of public work, Smalls lived to see his children educated, his community rise, and his name whispered with reverence among those who once thought freedom impossible. He passed away in 1915 in the very house where he had once been enslaved, a quiet, poetic victory that history rarely grants. Therefore, his story lives on not in textbooks alone, but in the names of schools, military bases, and streets across America. The U.S. Navy even renamed a warship, once bearing the name of a Confederate general, to honor him, the USS Robert Smalls. But beyond the honors and plaques lies the deeper truth. Robert Smalls' courage wasn't born of revenge. It was born of clarity. He saw a world built to contain him and refused to accept its boundaries. Therefore, his journey speaks to something timeless. It reminds us that freedom is not a single act. It's a constant battle, one that must be fought in every generation, in every form. So, when we talk about heroes, remember this. Some carry swords, others carry ideals. And some, like Robert Smalls, steer a stolen ship straight into history. Because real courage isn't just escaping chains, it's building a world where no one needs to.